Alright, well, the hitch is on. No. Hello everybody and welcome to an episode of How To. In this episode we're going to be installing a Class 3 trailer onto our Discovery Sport. The trailer itself is a Curt trailer, which I picked up off of eTrailer, as you can see here. It's model C13396. This is actually a newer model which requires a little less trimming than the previous version of it. So let's start out by clicking that like button and subscribe for future content. It really does help out the channel. So let's get started. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is to lift up the back end so you can get easier access to install the hitch. And to do this, I just use a pair of ramps that I have, since we're not going to be taking the wheels off in any fashion. So the first part of this is we need to lower the exhaust down to be able to remove the manifold up top. So this needs to come down. So to drop the exhaust, we need to disconnect the two support bolts, and they are connected right here. And needless to say, this is a pretty tight fit, and if you've been driving your vehicle any length of time, these could also be pretty well corroded too. So removing these, you're going to need a 10mm socket, and to my surprise, this came off relatively easily. The hard part of this for me was just accessing it. My ratcheting wrench here could barely squeeze in, and if I had a deep socket, there's probably no way I could pull these out. So, and if these take a while to get out, don't panic. It actually took me probably a good 45 seconds of ratcheting to get each of these out. So it's not just a quick couple turns. They are really deep in there. So just keep on turning and you'll get it out eventually. This is actually probably where a power wrench would come in really handy. So as you can see, the other side is basically the same process. You're just going to go through, remove the bolts again, and as soon as you start to do this, this exhaust is going to start coming loose and begin to drop. So just be ready for that, of course. Now just be aware though, it's not going to completely drop off. It's still going to be relatively stable because you have a secondary hanger that you're going to have to remove that's midway through the engine, which we're going to get to next. But before you do that, make sure that you do add some type of support to hold up the rear exhaust. In this case, I used a couple of bungee cords to hold this up in place, so when I do release that middle, it will be good to go. So there is this last piece of the exhaust support we need to pull up. There's actually one more up top, but this is the next one we need to remove. There's tools you can use. I ended up just using my superhuman strength to basically just rip this off. And again, once you pull this off, it will drop pretty far down unless you have it supported. So after a lot of work, it came loose for me. And you can see those straps are holding it up in the back. So now we're going to start removing the rear fascia, and we start with this gray plastic, and we need to remove a number of screws in the bottom here. These are all 10mm again. So just go ahead and release these, and these go pretty easily. Should be no real issues here. And with the screws off, you basically just lift this piece off, and it just unbuckles out. And it might seem a little scary to pull this out because it might resist it, but just go ahead and get it out there. Just be careful though, you don't want to break the retaining clips up top there. And you take this off, and as you can see, it kind of makes it honestly look a little bit more off-roady in my opinion, in a way. Alright, so at this point we need to start taking off this rear bumper fascia. There are 4 screws in the back, so just go ahead and use the same socket again. Take this off. This first one, these take a little bit of time, but they come off pretty easily. I didn't have any issues at all with taking these off, really. And there's 2 on the right, 2 on the left here, as you can see. And of course, do yourself a favor and put these in some type of container. Like an idiot me, I just throw them on the ground, so I just scurry around and find them later, of course. So, learn from my mistakes. I should actually probably do these series as how not to do something, I think sometimes. And once we have those back 4 off, we need to take 2 more on each side, right behind each wheel well. And these hold that plastic trim to that rear bumper fascia. And these are relatively easy to remove. One thing to take a note, definitely wear glasses if you're going to go underneath here. Because as I started pulling these out myself, I had sand and debris and everything else just flying down in my face. So definitely make sure you're wearing eye protection when doing this. And sorry about this last angle here. I didn't have the camera centered, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Alright, so now that we have these screws off, let's go ahead and check to see what my little helping buddy is doing. And I see he is hard at work, of course. That we have those outer screws off, we need to take off these screws that attach to the heat shield right above the muffler. Which is one of the reasons we had to lower the muffler. I thought these would actually give me quite a hard time, but surprisingly these screws came off relatively easily actually. Oh, and I'm saying screws, but these are, I guess they're sort of like a bolt. It's like this tiny thin little bolt that goes on top of the screw, and the screw itself is actually attached to the body underneath there. Oh, and be careful too, because they're kind of sharp. As I was going through, I must have banged my head into those at least once or twice. Probably gave me partial tetanus. Well, did have a tetanus shot, so I'm probably okay there. But just be careful. So, and you probably see here too, as I'm doing this up, I'm having debris flying everywhere. Again, this back end is probably gonna be filled with sand and dirt and everything. So, just be careful as you're going through. Now, this is not the easiest thing to see, but there are 2 more bolts that hold up the plastic here, and you'll see them. They're kind of tucked in. You're going to have to release those to be able to pull this last piece out. Alright, so with those screws out and the bolts out, it's time to go ahead and take out this lower part of the underbody so we can go ahead and install the hitch. And as you can see here, it is not an easy thing to do. They really have this jammed in tight, which is not surprising for a Land Rover. Land Rover never makes things easily accessible. So in the end, I ended up just wiggling this out slowly and then brute force just pulling it out at the end to get it out of there. And there's no other easy way that I can tell from doing this. And obviously, you're going to need that exhaust pretty far out of the way. So at this point, you could theoretically start installing the hitch, unless you're unlucky like I am, where you have these 2 18mm bolts attached to the frame, which you need to take off first. And as you can see, I get up my breaker bar, I cannot even budge these things, almost to the point where I'm almost going to break my socket. Well, no problem, Brian, just bring in a cheater bar. A cheater bar will do it, of course, right? And of course, it did not. They make it look really easy in the videos because what are they using? Well, the answer is pretty simple. They are using an impact driver. And I definitely recommend using this on your Land Rover as well as any future video. It has completely changed my life. Because if you worked on anything like a stuck bolt like this, you know it can take forever. My gosh, look how quickly this thing cuts through it just like butter. I have had 0 issues getting any bolt off with this tool. So now that we have everything off the Discovery, we can now finally add the hitch. So let's take a quick look. E-trailer shipped it to me relatively quick. The box arrived with an end sticking out, but no real damage. The instructions seem okay at first and are the same as online. They're basically printed out. It comes with the bolts needed to attach it to the frame. And at this point, I'm thinking, this is going to be pretty straightforward. Boy, was I wrong. So, attaching the bolts is pretty straightforward. You're going to put it in these slots here, and it kind of makes sense when you look at the hitch compared to what you're looking at the back of your frame here. Obviously, test to make sure the bolts go in first before you go ahead and actually start putting them through. The big issue I had here was trying to hold this up and do it by myself. Easier with two people, otherwise you're going to have to find a way to support this hitch, which is quite heavy actually. My solution was pretty simple. I found an old storage container. I put the muffler and supported that on top of there, lifting it up much closer. And on top of that, I put the hitch. That got it close enough for me to have a better chance to install this on my own. So basically you need to find a way to lift the hitch up. In this case, I felt pretty confident this would work, and it did. So the first thing I did is try to get on the driver's side, and that went on relatively easily. I hand tightened these bolts to get them in place, and my thought was if I get one side up, I can lift the other side up. And obviously you want to do these hand tight when you put these on. You don't want to screw these in too tight to begin with, otherwise you don't get that maneuverability. And in this case I put in all 3 bolts. I did end up having to remove 2 of them in order to maneuver the other side. So with that part done, I switched to the other side and I tried to get this up, and as try as I could with those 3 bolts in, I could not get this into place. It was really frustrating. So ultimately, to get this side in, you sort of have to lift the hitch into the back of the bumper. So I first had to undo 2 bolts on the other side, and then as you can see, wiggle this basically into place. It is really difficult to get in. Words can't describe. Now just make a note that these are 22mm bolts that we're putting in, and there are 6 of them, as you can see here. After hand tightening them, I went ahead and got out the impact wrench to get them most of the way. And then of course, once we have them pretty close, we're going to get out our torque wrench and bring them to spec. The spec for these is 88 foot-pounds-feet of torque. So try to get that as best you can. Obviously it's not the easiest area to work in with everything here, but you should be able to manage it. So at this point we have the hitch basically attached and on. We just have to reassemble everything. So I went ahead and secured the muffler with my bucket. And then as you can see, it did snow between now and then, so it did take a few days to get this on. And at this point the peanut gallery came out to inspect my progress. Alright, well the hitch is on. No.
Did you find your other GoPro?
Not yet.
I might know where you have it.
Where?
I put my hands in all your hiking bag pockets. There's something shaped like that. No. It's one of the little mesh pockets inside.
You know, you might be right. So as I mentioned to Pepper there, it's time to start trimming. So I looked in the instructions and I mapped out exactly what I had to cut. And I did not realize until I started that this image looks nothing like my Discovery Sport body panel. So I cut this piece off here. And the reality is I did not even need to touch this piece, which is pretty disappointing. If your Discovery looks like this before you go to put your hitch on, you do not need to touch this lower body panel. Because I think, if I had to guess, the ones that are coming, at least my model, which is the SE, already come pre-set up for the hitch. In fact, this actually almost might be the body panel that they use for the electric hitch over in Europe. So you can actually skip this part and not cut this piece out. Okay, so actually I take that back. You are going to have to modify this body panel, but nothing like that diagram says. As we'll see later in the video. Alright, so this leaves us to put the panel back on, which seems like it should be relatively easy. You just slide this place in the exact reverse that we took it out. And at first it seemed that way, but for whatever reason I could not get this back in. I scratched my head and I thought, am I doing this the wrong way? I went back, I was looking through the manual, then I went to looking through the website, and I found the most interesting comment. So it appears someone had the same issues I had, where the diagram and instructions looked nothing like what they had, which leads me to believe these instructions are wrong. And as you can look up here, you see how that frame is, not the frame, but the hitch is hitting the fascia. You actually need to further, as you can see in that illustration there, you need to further go ahead and actually cut out where the lower part of that hitch frame is. So I get out my Dremel and I'm basically going to wing this as best as I can. You're basically cutting out sections so that the frame of the hitch can actually protrude through this body panel here. So let's get started. And I basically can't recommend using a Dremel enough to do this. And you can kind of see the frame starting to poke out here, which is what I'm trying to get to come out. I have to do this on both sides, of course. But this Dremel is really handy. I actually did a review on this, I think a few months ago. This is the cordless version, which really came in well. Now this is sort of, you can see I have it almost all the way at this point, but I still have to cut off the part at the bottom of that video there. If we look at the underbody of the panel, where you basically have to cut is in this section here. I mean, this is not precise, but this is about where I had to cut in order to get those frame sections through from the hitch. And I thought about going back, touching it up, or fabricating something to cover it up. Truth is that right above there is where your exhaust is going to be, so you're never really going to see it. So I decided just not to worry about it, because it's not visual. And if you also look to the right, it already is exposed with a hole from the factory on the right hand side there. So it's not like it's not exposed already. So I decided to call it a day for trimming the panel because it fit. Alright, so this is what it basically looked like when I finished. Bit of a hack job, but you're not going to see it, and I'll probably fix it up again later. So at this point we're going to start putting the lower panel back on. Which is just the reverse of when we took it off. And for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. It's just taking all these 10 millimeter screws and fasteners. You can see now I'm putting the heat shield back on. And as always, I usually just try to screw these in a bit to make sure everything is secure and fit. So in case I need to remove something, but it's going along pretty well here for the most part. And of course, you're just pushing this back up. Again, be careful with these screws. I mean, mine were pretty rusty. I mean, not super rusty, but, you know, and pretty dirty. And gosh, you know, you move the wrong area, those little guys are kind of sharp, actually. So, and again, these are 10 millimeter. All right, with that heat shield on, it's time to start putting on the rest of the bolts for this lower body. Some of these are hard to reach, so it does help to have an extension when you're fastening these. I also had a 10 millimeter screwdriver, which really helped a lot too to move, obviously, these into place because these aren't the easiest to reach by hand. Oh, one thing to note, when I took this off, my clip fell off, so I just had to push this clip back in. Just be aware you do need the clips up in these two sections up here. And that's pretty straightforward. Alright, so now it's time to put on that gray piece here. I lined it up first, and then I went to cutting. To my surprise, this metal bracket here is pretty thick, so I had to pull out the big gun. So with that metal brace off, now it's time to go ahead and trim the plastic. And I just want a little bit of time with this. I had pretty much given up any faith in the instructions as far as the layout after realizing the other plastic trim was off, so I just took a little bit off at a time until it basically fit in. So this seemed to get it to work. I was able to get the tabs in, screw it back in. It's a little bit of a rough cut job around the edges. You don't really actually notice it that much, but what I did order were some black strips to line that out. You could also just obviously file it down, and then you're putting your last bolts in here to tie it in and finishing it up. Alright, so last part here, we're going to go ahead and reattach the muffler. I found the best thing to do is to lift that up as high as you can using blocks and whatnot, and then using your brute force, just go ahead and reattach the clips here. And that's pretty straightforward. This back part here I was not looking forward to because this is pretty hard to access. But to my surprise, it went on pretty easily. Now, I do have a mechanics wrench here, which is a lot skinnier, which you can get in. Once I had it in the most part, I was able to then go to my traditional ratchet to get it the rest of the way. And again, these bolts go pretty far deep in, so you'll probably be turning quite a bit to get them all the way in, unless you have an automatic wrench. Alright, and now we have our hitch installed. Really happy with the final result for the most part. And it seems to work really well. My immediate use for this was for a bike rack. I have not installed the wiring kit yet. When I do that, I'll post a follow-up video for the wiring kit. As you can see, for the most part, I'm going to use this for attachments for now, such as a bike rack, and which came in really handy. The immediate use for this is we were heading up to Cape Cod, so I wanted to get this on so I could put the bikes on the back. And these were from a previous review on the Hyper e-bikes we picked up. So what are my overall thoughts on this hitch now that I've owned it for a few months? It's a really solid hitch. It can tow over 4,000 pounds, which is awesome. Of course, that has to do just as much with the vehicle itself. And overall, I think it's a really good product. And granted, the install was a pain, but if you paid somebody to do this, actually would be really good. I think it looks a lot better than the older version, which you can see here. And in fact, when I saw you had to cut it out this much and it hung out that much over the bumper, I immediately said, no. And I held off. And I'm glad I did, actually. Yeah, so overall, I'm pretty happy with the purchase. And I think it's a good investment for the Land Rover that we have. And we put it through its paces so far. And I hope you did enjoy this video. I tried to do the best I can. It took about, overall, start to finish, about 5 or 6 hours to put this in. Obviously, I spread this over a couple weekends, which is easy to do if you have an extra vehicle lying around. So obviously, keep that in mind if you try to install it yourself. If you did enjoy this video, please click like and subscribe for future content. It really does help out our channel. We try to upload as often as we can. And we hope to see you in a future video. And until then, get out there, make your own great outdoor adventures. And as always, take care.